Hi, this is Angus at LabVac. Up on the bench today I have an Alcatel 2008A vacuum pump. It's another oil-sealed rotary, so we're going to get into this and see the differences between this and the other models that I've already covered. Distinctive pumps in that they have, first of all, the heaviest motor in the whole kingdom, incredibly heavy motors. And they have this distinctive bright orange colour. This one is not very bright. I'd suggest this might be an early pump. They got a lot brighter than this as time went on, and they stuck with this orange colour for a very long time before eventually moving over to the more light grey colour that we see in all laboratories. So these orange pumps are out there. There's still quite a lot of them around. I see a few a year. This one has actually come out of my old stock, so it's been sitting in a container for a good 10 years or so. I went to drain the oil out of this morning and there was absolutely nothing. Nothing came out, which is slightly worrying. As a result, I'm going to glove up for this one, at least until we get to see the inside, decide what we're dealing with. I'm also going to mention that it's 10 degrees in here this morning. It is very cold. So if you hear my teeth chattering at any point, that's what's causing it. So, to start dismantling this, I need to, or I want to at least, tip it up on its end. I'm going to remove the drain plug because I know there's nothing in there, and that's a little bit bulky to have underneath it. Still got a sight glass sticking out there, but that's a little bit better. Got all kinds of collected dust and so on underneath here, which we'll get rid of as we go, and then we can jump in and get this base plate removed. I'll start with that. It's coming undone easily enough. No signs of any rust on the outside of it. So that's the base plate off. Give that a good clean up. Now, interesting and I think probably unique to Alcatel at this stage, rather than having 4 bolts for the oil box and 4 bolts for the motor, they used a single stud that runs right the way through and holds everything together all in one go. So when we take these bolts off here, everything will be loose. But it's still the basic format of removing the motor, getting it out of the way, mainly so that we don't have that weight to deal with for too long. So there are 4 bolts, nuts rather, 4 nuts on the end of those studs. So we'll get those out of the way. We've also on this particular pump got this fairly unusual looking plug, which I'm guessing means that the pump came from a specific piece of instrumentation and plugged directly into the instrument rather than going into a standard plug. But that said, it's a single phase 230 volt motor, so that will get rewired so that we have a conventional connection for it. So the trouble with gloves is it makes everything just a little bit more difficult. Right, so our motor should now lift off here, which it does. Fairly standard two-piece coupling with a rubber spider between the two, which you can already see is broken and just falling apart just from age. Happens to us all. So I'll get the motor out of the way. I would normally test that at this point, but I'll have to sort the plug out first. And then we've got a integrated coupling and fan assembly here. It is turning, so the pump's free. A bit sticky in places, but it is turning. Now we should, I can see in here there's the shaft here, there's a key on there, which presumably will have a grub screw holding it in place, which we should be able to access under there. Might need to get a bit more light in there to see what's going on, but I'm going to guess that it's a 3mm Allen key to undo that, which it is. That's gone in there. And that grub screw. You only need to release that really to remove the coupling, but I've undone that all the way. I don't know whether this is going to lift off or not. Might need to get a bit heavy-handed with it. Let's see if I can ease that up. Yeah, there we go. Once it was loose, it was loose. There we go. So that comes off there, and there's the grub screw. Nothing else to be aware of there, so I can let that back into the coupling so it's not going to get lost. And now we can start to see shaft seal in the middle there. This is the felt pad, which would have been clean. It's hard to tell whether that shaft seal's leaked and filled the pad up. It doesn't look like it has. It looks like that's fairly dry. And as I always say, the felt pad is only there to catch the oil that starts to leak and just delay the time before you notice that your pump's leaking. Not a fan, but that's what's there. Now there is some oil now dripping out of there now that it's tipped up on end, which is a good sign. It actually looks like fairly clean oil as well, so we might not be quite so far off from a decent pump as maybe I'd feared. Just going to go under there and remove that key. It's going to need to be out so that the shaft can come out through the shaft seals. And then I'll put that in a pot so it doesn't get lost. So that's that end. I'm not going to go any further with that point right now. But as I say, having removed that, this this stud goes all the way through and is screwed into the oil box. So at this point the oil box should be free to come off, but obviously it's going to be very tightly on there. So we have to start doing a little bit of persuading. Just going very lightly on there, so I don't want to damage the end of the studs. It's had absolutely no impact at all, so we'll take a different approach. Back there then, we have a clamp mechanism that holds the inlet and outlet onto the adapter on this pump. It's kind of similar to what you see on the modern Vacubrand pumps. Similar idea, although they use 2 bolts instead of 1. And then with that lifted up, I can take out the exhaust port and the inlet, all very mucky. Underneath the inlet is a strainer, which again, apart from the accumulated dust, actually looks pretty clean, which is all good news. And we've got a big open space there. We've got an O-ring there. Well, it used to be an O-ring. That was from the exhaust side. And then we've got this damper. Let's take some of that off so you get a better idea of what it really looks like. This little rubber damper, again, similar to what you see on a modern RV pump from Edwards. It's just a noise reduction device. And then that stud is going to come out of there, but it's not important for us right now. What that does, getting rid of that, means that I've now got a bit of access to the oil box gasket there. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to ease that open. Just going to start by cutting into it a little bit to feel where we're at. The cork is still soft. This is being an older pump, it has a cork gasket. So yeah, I think that will loosen up. My trusty and somewhat mauled screwdriver with the de-sharpened blade. I'm just going to work that in a couple of places into that cork. There we go. Start to split it apart. There we go. That's the oil box free. I can remove the pump mechanism. So there's our orange oil box with a little sight glass at the top there. That's clean on the inside, not bad at all. I'm starting to feel better about this pump. Okay, so this is kind of your first glimpse inside the 2008. Some things will start to look familiar if you watched any of the other videos. We got a multi-stage construction here, held on with 4 rods, or 3 rods in this case. This cover over the top is housing and baffling the exhaust valves. So that's the next thing that we can remove. Just a couple of machine screws there. So with those off, that covering plate will come off. And underneath there we've got our exhaust valves. These two are from the initial stage. So they're effectively what I've talked about before, kind of interstage valves for overpressure when the pump is working hard. And then the final stage valve there. These are conventional rubber pads on springs. All of those parts should be in the replacement kit. Obviously the rubber parts need to be replaced. And then we can see one pumping stage, second pumping stage here. Now I'll flip this round and we can look at the other idiosyncrasy of the Alcatel pumps, which is this arrangement on the end. Now, as normal, we've got a pressure relief for oil pressure, which is this sprung plate here. What we've also got on these, though, is this impeller, which is unique to Alcatel. I wouldn't claim to understand why they did that. Nobody else ever did. the impeller spins with the rotation of the shaft, and obviously it moves the oil around that's sitting in the box. So it's kind of keeping the oil flowing inside the box. It's if somebody knows exactly in great detail why the impeller is necessary on one of these pumps, I would love for you to put it in the comments or contact me, because I'd like to learn more about that. It's also set off center on the shaft, which is hard to see at this point, but you can see that the coupling point there is off center from the impeller. Again, there must be a very good reason for that. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't know. Okay, let's get into it. There's a tiny circlip around this that holds the impeller onto there, so we can dig into that and hope not to ping it across the workshop. It's off, it's on the end of that screwdriver. Black gloves don't help, do they? But maybe you can see that. That's going to go in the pot, just in case I need it later. General rule with dismantling pumps or pretty much anything else: keep all the parts that come off, even if you think it's a replaceable part that you're going to throw away in the end. I always hang on to everything as it comes apart, just in case it turns out it's not in the kit. So with that off, we can take that impeller off there, and you can see it's keyed onto the end of the shaft there, but it's off center in such a way, and you've got a much larger hole than the pin size, so it's able to move backwards and forwards even when it's attached. Interesting. And we can take this big spring device off here. With those bolts out of the way, that comes off there. And then what this does, this is a rubber pad that's seating in the end here. Sits on top of an orifice in the end of the oil way. It just gives you some pressure control over that. Again, that rubber part, that rubber cone, should be replaced when we come to rebuild. That bolt holds this clamping plate down, which in turn keeps the oil part in place, and that it's rotating freely. It's not quite wanting to come off, so there's a bit of oil tension from the rather caked in oil there. It'll come off as we go through. So 3 bolts on the end of these studs that hold the pumping assembly together, which look like they're 13mm, and indeed they are. And they're on pretty tight. There we go. That's the first one. Right, so those nuts can come off. Free up the rest of the mechanism. So yeah, it's mid-November here in England, and the weather has finally hit. The winter weather's finally arrived. In the last couple of days we've been scraping ice from the cars, and it's all come as a bit of a shock, to be honest, after a pretty mild autumn. That's not going to pop away by itself. Why would I have thought that it would? But what we do have around the sides on all of these parts is slots provided. You can handily get a tool in there. Lift that up. Go for a smaller tool. Let's see whether one corner will be enough to release it. Yeah, it will. So all these sections are only held together by the compression provided by the studs. So all of that's going to come apart in one go. The rotor is holding it on. I'm just going to eyeball the back of that and make sure. Yeah. So I took the key out earlier, so there's nothing to stop that from pulling through. And that is the cartridge of the pump removed, and then you can see on the adapter here, if I turn that over, what we do have and should have down here is the gas ballast non-return valve, which in the case of this pump is our gas ballast control on the side. So you turn it to open it, the gas ballast will come through here, up past here, down through into the pump. And what we have as a non-return is a very, very fine spring there, which I've instantly dropped and lost. There it is. And that is sitting in that well there, and it's compressed against the pump cartridge. And underneath it, let's bring this up and see whether you can see it. Underneath it in there is a ball bearing. So we need that ball bearing out, and we need it to go back in when we're finished. It's pretty well held in there at the moment, so I'm just going to add a little bit of solvent in there. And give it a moment to release the oil that's in there, break down the oil a bit, release the tension so that that'll come out. And then I'm going to grab a fresh empty pot and put that very fine spring in there, and then I'll get the ball bearing out in a moment. The whole pump is doweled together, so these little dowels, you heard one of them fall out earlier. I'm going to collect those as we go, and then this can be taken apart just section by section. Each section's made up. Alcatel had pretty good steel. The steel that they use in these pumps is pretty good, so it lasts a long time. We've got a shaft seal here, which is effectively our inner shaft seal, the outer shaft seal being removable from the other side. And then everything along here is O-ring sealed. Sometimes pumps are, sometimes they're not. In this case there are O-rings in between every face, so it does get a good seal and doesn't rely quite so much on the tensioning as some other makes do. And then right up there, that's where the gas ballast comes through once it's passed. So section by section we can take that out. The rotor there, which just from a cursory look, again, condition is good. The steel is not pitted or damaged, it's not scratched. So that should clean up very well, ready to go back together. You can see these markings on here, which is where the shaft seal sits. So the inner one will be here, the outer one is here. Has left a mark, but from what I can tell through the gloves, there's no very deep scoring from the shaft seals, so we should be good there. And then our vanes, which in this case has 4 springs for one set of vanes, which seems like overkill, but why not? And again, just on a cursory look, I'll get a better look once I've cleaned everything, but they look in pretty good condition as well. And then the other sections will fall apart in whatever order they choose to, really. Remember, they are doweled, so you do want to work backwards and forwards from side to side if you need to use tools to get these apart, just to make sure that you're not pushing with all force against one and binding the dowels inside the unit. And they will gradually work their way apart. There we go. So that's the first stator. Again, with its dowels, I will want to, during cleaning, get all of those dowels out, all the O-rings out, and make sure that we're clean all the way through the inside. I know I always say it, but the real magic of doing this work is in the cleaning process. That's what restores your vacuum. Then in the centre section here between the two stators, we have our block which transfers the compressed gases between stages. It also has some oil ways in there, and there's another shaft seal in here. Beyond the shaft seals, again, with these Alcatel pumps, you have brass bushings that are pressed in, and they appear all the way through. So there's one here, they appear throughout the pump, these brass bushings that are put in there. They're effectively their bearing surfaces. They'll have an oil coating when the pump's running, and all of the sections sit inside that brass, which keeps it very smooth running. The brass needs to be in good condition, just like everything else, so if there's any scoring or damage in there, they are replaceable. You can press them or knock them out and put new ones in. It wouldn't be part of a standard service, but maybe after many years use that would be necessary. And then you've also, very difficult to see I'm sure, but just here, the brass bushing there actually has an oil pathway, so there's a hole through the centre of it where the oil will come through, and then a groove there that allows it to spread across the surface, keep it lubricated. So there's a fair few differences to maybe other pumps that we've seen. A slightly more elaborate build standard. There's our second rotor with that strange assembly for the impeller on the back end of it. And again, the vanes that go with it. More O-rings that can all come out. And then I'll just release the final two sections from each other. It's a smaller slot. It's alright, I have lots of screwdrivers. So the history of Alcatel, I'm not going to claim to be any kind of historian, particularly on companies that I know not a great deal about, but Alcatel is a French company, massive French company, very big in mobile phone technology and all kinds of other things. Alcatel pumps was only ever a part of the operation. They went on to change the name to Dixon. So you'll also see Dixon pumps. This one is very much an Alcatel at this period, but the later ones that don't have the garish orange colouring are generally branded Dixon. They all come from the same manufacturer effectively. That's the second stator, and that's looking in good condition. And also, if you're able to see it, the duo seal just here, which is where the rotor and stator come together. Let's see if I can flash a bit more light on there, that might help. You can see the duo seal there, where the radius there changes very slightly. You can see the difference, and that's all in good condition as well. So I think, despite the slight scare of having absolutely no oil in it for possibly the last 15 years, the pump's in pretty good condition. Up at the end here, there is another shaft seal. This one's held in place with a spring clip, circlip. So just to show that with the circlip pliers, get into the two ears of that, and hopefully it's compressing nicely, but it's not keen to come out. I'm going to have to take a two-handed approach to that. Make sure it's still visible. Oh, I'm kind of wishing that I'd done this off camera, but I've started now, so I've got to persevere, haven't I? Oh, nearly that time. There we go. There we go. As it pings away, there's a circlip there that's holding that shaft seal in, so that needs to come out. There's another brass bushing there. So all of those parts need to get taken away, cleaned up. Just to show you, removing some of these O-rings are quite well seated still, so I just use a pick. Just get around it. Got to be careful, you don't want to put scratches into here, because these are all sealing surfaces, but just gently go into it. Actually put the pick directly into the rubber itself, so it grips into there and pulls it out. And then all of these shaft seals have got to come out. So there's a range of techniques available to remove shaft seals. When you've got access, good access here, it's right on the outside, you may be able to get a blade. Again, this screwdriver has actually had the sharp edges ground off it. I'm just going to see if it will slide in behind the shaft seal. Oh, ping it out. It won't. Those are pretty well stuck in there, and that's probably going to be the case all the way across. So the next thing I'm going to try is the split collet bearing and seal remover. So what happens here is this end is split, push that into the seal, and then by winding this bolt in, you can open out the leaves to get a good tight seal in behind it. That one's too large. So let's see whether the next size down is going to be big enough. It looks like it will. So if I can get that just opens up then behind the seal. and then I'll wind that out to make it sit tightly. Grip the collar and wind the bolt further in. So that's now sitting between the metal and the seal. And I can put a slide hammer onto the end of that. Let's see whether that will pull the seal. There it goes. Pop straight out. The nice thing with using the split collet puller is if you insert it carefully in the first place, it's highly unlikely that it's going to do any damage. Prying, if the seal is still nice and soft and it comes out easily, then prying is fine. But you are obviously prying against sealing surfaces inside the pump, so if you really need to dig into it, then you will start to do damage to the surfaces. So that's the best way to take those seals out. There are other options, you know. If you don't have a workshop full of tools like I do, there are other options for getting it, and that's the seal. It's just sitting on there. So once that bolt's wound back out, that seal can come off there. It'll be the same for all of those. So we'll do the same thing to remove all of those. Just take a look at there's the ball bearing. See, I'd forgotten about it. So that's the ball bearing for the gas ballast non-return. That effectively is the valve pad. The valve spring sits behind that. So when the gas ballast is turned off and there's no force against it, the spring is pushing that ball bearing down into the seat and keeping it tight so that oil can't leak back out of the pump through here. So we can take that off. There's a big bolt through the middle of it, which is nice and free. Take the bolt out, take the knob off there, and then that brass piece there moves backwards and forwards. The groove here that the brass sits in gets deeper as it comes around, so it allows that to be pushed closed by the knob or allowed to open. That's going to be tricky to get out. This is not a sealing surface, so I can apply a little bit of force to that, but I want to be careful. I still, even though it's not sealing on that, I don't want to inflict damage onto the brass. But if it will come out easily, then I can just lift it like that. And again, if it was a bit more stuck in there, then I would apply some solvent to it just to release it. So that takes that out, and then again there's a spring under there. So as the knob rotates, if it's in the deep part, it will be up, and then as you turn the knob, it will push down on that against the spring, give you a tight seal. And then through there is the orifice that comes back to here, where our spring and ball bearing were. So that's that part. These rods are going to need to come out because I want to clean behind those. And again, we don't want to damage the threads, obviously, but the bare shank up the middle, we should be able to grip. And if they're reasonably loose, that will be enough there to just take it out. Again, if they were really stuck in there, I don't want to risk chewing up the shank of the studs. So I would use a stud extractor, which is a different type of tool, which grips in a different way and is less damaging. It would allow me to get that. These two are a little bit tighter in there. If you don't have a stud extractor, your third option would be to take the bolts that were on there, wind that bolt all the way down, And then take a second nut. Why am I saying bolt? Take a second nut, put it on underneath there, and then with a couple of spanners, you can grip the two nuts and lock them together to each other. And once they're locked together, you should then be able to turn that, and that will release it. There's a few options there for getting those studs out, with or without any complicated tooling. And then obviously you just need to unlock those from each other. So there's a few options there that will give us be able to clean right into there, be able to get right through the inlet, you can see, which is now with that strainer out of the way, and get right down in there and clean it. There's a lot of this cork gasket still floating around, so that needs to come off. And again, it depends how lucky we are. On a fresher pump, you'd be able to just pull that out. But where it's really stuck on, the way that I find is best to do it, this is a Stanley knife blade. Don't know what that would be called in other countries, but hopefully you can see from it what it is. And then you just want to gently work away at that stuck on cork, and eventually you get underneath it and be able to remove that all the way round. This one is well and truly stuck on there. It's going to take some work, and again, you don't want to damage those surfaces, so time and patience will pay off with that, so that you end up with a clean surface. And then the last thing to look at, another one of these circlips. Here we go. We need to get the outer shaft seal out. Again, it's tricky to do because although I can fairly easily compress the circlip, I can't get the pins right the way through because obviously it's right up against the seal itself. But I can get a screwdriver in there while it's compressed. So there's another circlip there, and then we've got the same process to do to remove the outer shaft seal. Amazing how the pile of tools mounts up. So I'll free that up and take that's the first shaft seal we took off. It's the same diameter shaft at this point, so the same tool should work. So I want to make sure that is just behind the seal and not catching. There's another one of those brass sections, the bushing there, which I don't want to damage, so I'm just making sure that I've only got the seal and not the bushing. Then go back on with the slide hammer. And this is what often happens with these, is that the puller actually doesn't grip the doesn't grip enough and pulls out through the centre like you saw. So I'll give it another go. Just work it in there, making sure it's not grabbing anything else. And I'll go a bit tighter this time and see if that gets it. So I'll just tighten that a little bit further this time. Man, that is really in there. Really in there tight. So let's think of another approach that we can take. Remove that tool. That didn't work. Let's see whether in this instance the screwdriver technique might have been the better choice. Got to get in behind the seal and then try and keep it in tight while working it. And there it goes. That ended up in the oil box, I think. There we go. So probably a combination of techniques to get that out. And then that can all be thoroughly cleaned in there. And again, you've got an oil passage behind the bushing in this case, which needs to be clean and make sure that everything can circulate around as it should. And then from this angle, you can now see quite clearly how that top piece is held in. I can actually clean all of this easily without removing it, so I don't think I need to disturb that. There should be a replacement again for this rubber flap in the kit when you come to put that back together, which we will do after a day of cleaning. So I'm going to take all these parts away. They'll go through an initial wipe down clean where they just get, sprayed with solvent, wiped with a cleaner rag than this one, just to take the surface off, get rid of the oil. Then they'll go through the ultrasonic tank, which does a much deeper clean and penetrates through all the oil ways and gas pathways to get them really clean back. And then if necessary, there'll be some abrasive work with polishing mops and things like that to go around the outside. This actually looks very clean now that I've got it apart. So with all the cleaning processes, you do what the pump needs. There's not a standard process of do this step. You have to look at it, you have to assess it and do the cleaning techniques that are required, which is why I don't include them. For one reason, they have to have some, you have to stop and look and decide what cleaning techniques are appropriate. What you don't want to do is over clean things and end up, leaving any scratch marks or anything on the surfaces. So it's a bit of an in-depth process in itself, just the cleaning. But also it takes hours. These videos are long enough already, I'm sure you agree. So I'll take those away, clean everything up, and then we'll come back to the bench for reassembly with all the clean parts in the kit. Okay, good morning. It's the next day. Everything is cleaned and we're ready to start rebuilding this thing. So I'll begin here with just a quick look at the parts that I've got in the kit, just to make sure I've got everything I need. So I've got the baffle plate, which goes in conjunction with this steel plate between the pump and the motor. I've got a new cork gasket. I tell you, yesterday, getting that cork gasket off, that was the hardest job of the lot. New felt pad, because they feel I need it. And then I've got a bag of the soft parts, which looks good to me. I've got my 4 shaft seals. I've got 4 valves. Now, obviously this kit covers a range of pumps, a number of different sizes. I'm only going to need 3 of those, but so I'll have a bit left over. Now, this item here, I missed out yesterday. When I took this plunger out of the gas ballast, I forgot at the time to remove this seal, which is in there. So that's the old one that came out. Put that to one side, and I've got a fresh new one that's going to go in there. So that's what that part is for. I've got the little valve that sits on this assembly that goes into the end. So the old one's been removed. That new one will go in there. Various O-rings and so on to go through there. So at this stage, pretty confident that everything I need to rebuild the pump is going to be here, which is always good news. Move all of those out to the side. And then what I've also got with this kit is a full set of steel parts, including that little ball bearing from the gas ballast. It is rolling around there. So I've got that. I've got a new spring for it. I think I saw is in there somewhere. Vane springs, all that sort of stuff. New springs for the valves. Even new circlips to go behind those. So everything that I should need, and some. Even got new washers for all the nuts as well. Now, having randomly tipped that out onto the bench, it's going to cause me all kinds of grief. Let's put all of that in a pot, because if that goes down the drain holes, that's going to cause me bother. So all the parts that are likely to roll away can go in there, the rest of it out of the way. So first thing that I need to do here is to get the shaft seals installed back into the pump. The new one's fitted. So I've got one that goes in the outside. All 4 of these are the same for this particular pump. The outer shaft seal I'm not going to fit just now. I'm going to put everything... No, that's not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is build it up onto the pump. So that'll go in there. I'm going to be using a standard seal driver and rubber mallet. So I'm going to push that in by hand just to get it sitting flat. And I'm going to go on to my more solid space just off camera. With a few sharp taps, that's sat that down where it needs to be, and then I can install a new circlip behind that. Make sure the clip has gone home all the way round. And that's my first shaft seal installed, so I'm going to work through the rest of them. I've got the inner, which goes here in the end plate. That's that one in place. Just check it round by eye to make sure it has sat down all the way. Which it now has. One that goes into the centre bearing right there. Now the final one sits in the end plate here. It actually needs to be installed in reverse because the oil is on this side. So the shaft seal needs to be sitting in here, this direction, where the other ones have all been installed the other way round. Makes it a little bit trickier to install. So you've got to make sure the tool is sitting on the outside surface. I've just been paying a little bit more attention with that. Picked up a bit of fluff putting that in, so I'll just clear that with some air. And then that one will get the other circlip to hold it in place. Circlips do have, the way they're constructed, they have kind of a sharp edge and a slightly more rounded edge. You want the sharp edge to be facing the way that it is designed to hold against. So it's the pressure is holding in this direction. I doubt if it really makes a great deal of difference, but that's the way it should be. So there we go. That's all four of the shaft seals installed, so they're ready to go together. So I'm going to build the pump up on here. The first thing that I need to remember to do is to install the gas ballast non-return, which is that spring and ball bearing. I really want to do that at the last moment as I put the piece on that's going to hold it in place, because it's not an installed part as such, it's sitting loose between surfaces. So first up is to reinstall the three studs that will end up holding it all together. They've been cleaned. I can see that they just pushed some of the remaining cleaning solvent out of there by putting that in. I'll take that out again. Make sure those are all clean, and also make sure that there's nothing left on the end of that. Doing this all just by hand, doesn't need to be tight. And these studs will actually get tension when the nuts go on the other end and pull the whole thing together. There's no absolute, this is the only way that this can be done. These could be installed afterwards, but I'm gambling on the fact that it's easier to do it now. So that's those components. The next thing that I need back out from the pot is the ball bearing, which just drops down into that hole, and that acts as my non-return, and then left behind in the bag here and not keen to come out. There we go. That's the spring that goes behind that. All the other springs from that bag are identical. They're longer, narrower. Those are for the vanes. This is my non-return valve spring. You can see it sits very proud there when this section sits down on top of it. That's going to hold it in place, and there is the orifice that it allows the gas ballast to come through, so it'll locate into that hole there and put those together. Might be a little bit tricky to get that into place, but we'll get there. So a whole bunch of O-rings that came in the kit can start to be put into place now. And again, there are options. You can do these one at a time. I'm kind of applying O-rings so that I ensure that they will get used up. So there's going to be another one on the other side of that component. Not there. One in there. There we go. And then there is also one that sits into this groove here, thus. And then I can install the first part. Just worth checking. Yeah, I had a feeling I wasn't going to quite get away with that. Simple trick that usually works with that is to just take some vacuum oil, smear it onto there. Hopefully we'll have enough surface tension then to hold that O-ring in place. No, we won't. Let's try putting some into the groove first. See if that will hold it better. Yeah. Won't hold it for long, but it'll hold it long enough for installation. Then all of these surfaces want to have vacuum oil applied to them. You could get high tech and use a brush, but I'm going to end up covered in oil by the end, so I'll just use my finger. And then I need to ensure that that spring is captured into that hole as this goes together. I'm going to bring that part into place and then lift the whole thing up, and I can just about eyeball that spring. Do with a little bit more light. I think that's gonna, just that little bit of oil is enough to hold that for now, so I can get that into place. There we go. So with that entrapped, the next thing is to line up the dowels, and that's the end plate in place. That should be the trickiest one because of those extra components. The rest of it should go together easier than that. So the next thing we'll need is the rotor and the vanes. These vanes are being cleaned. I'll just hone the leading surface of them to make sure they're smooth, and then new set of springs to go in there. Obviously if your vanes are damaged, scratched, they've got chunks out of them, then you would need a separate kit of new vanes to put in. But I can assemble all of those together. There we go, just make sure they're all in there correctly. There's no side cuts or channeling in these vanes at all, so orientation is not an issue for us. A little bit of oil, slide that in. So with the vanes in place, the shaft can go through. Now this is going to pass through two shaft seals, that inner and outer shaft seal that we've installed, both going to come into play with this. So again, caution and patience, line it up. The shaft is stepped, it's very difficult to see because the steps are very small, but it is stepped, so there are tight points where it actually goes through. There we go. That's dropped all the way down into position. And I'm just checking that it turns freely, watching that the vanes will catch on the dowels without the stator in place. Feels good. Just going to turn it over, have a look at the back, make sure the seal went in nicely. Yeah. Obviously, if that goes in cockeyed, it could push the seal, catch the lip, cause the seal to distort, and then it wouldn't operate properly. So there we go. And then we build up from there. So we've got our O-ring already in place, which has been lubricated, but can't really put too much assembly lubrication in. Never build the pump dry because it won't circulate oil fast enough to prevent damage on startup if it goes together dry. And then we build up sections. In terms of orientation, the inlet to the pump is here, gas is coming in through here, so the large orifice here is going to face in that direction. And then you can also kind of double check things like that by checking where's my valve plate going to go. A lot of it's remembering, of course, how you took it apart. And also worth not having a great long gap between dismantling and rebuilding. I tend to have a lot of other things to do in the course of a day, so most times when these videos are being made, they're being done over the course of a couple of days or maybe longer. Normally a pump would come in, get stripped clean, rebuilt, all in one session. Then I'm going to apply further assembly lubrication all the way around that surface. Nothing else to add at this point, so we move on then to the centre section, where again now, in terms of orientation for this, we can work from the fact that we've got a channel here, which is our gas ballast coming through, which is again going to come through here, so we know which direction that block has to go. They've also handily cut one corner off here, so that chamfered edge is going to line up as well. Lubricate particularly the shaft seal, and I can also see that my O-ring's fallen out of that channel as well. So we'll reapply that, check that it's holding, which it is, and lower that down. So the shaft seal meets the shaft, goes in nicely, and we make sure that the dowel's lined up. Flying along, flying along. Second rotor section, this keys onto the first one. There's no coupling in between there, just drops straight into place. So we'll get that lubricated up, ready to go in. And take our vanes. New springs for those. The springs are delicate, easy to kink those over and damage them. Fortunately, there's a couple of spares in here. Obviously on a larger pump, more springs would be employed, so I do have some spares, but try not to need them. And just make sure that key goes on correctly. And that's in there. Stator goes around that. Just need to pinch the springs together to get them to go in. That one's not moving. Go. So all these little things that you're checking as you go along. That drops into place. And then our final section goes on top of that. So again, lubricate the shaft seal that's in there. Double check that the clip is down. Make sure that O-ring's not going to fall out. And then lower that into place. Put it the right way round to begin with. Because of course this is actually engaging with the studs. Doesn't feel very willing. Doesn't want to take into that lip seal there. Now at this point someone is no doubt screaming, you need a bullet over the end of that shaft, which would help. A bullet is a fine cone that you would sit over there just to make it easier for that to slide in. I don't have one for this pump. There we go. There we go. Finally it sits down. It's nearly there. It's not totally there. Got one side down, not the other. There's a couple of options there. I can get the nuts on there and just wind it down, or I can just persuade it. It's just where it's engaging with the dowels, and the dowels are tight. So there we go. That's the pump cartridge rebuilt and all the seals in place. So onto there, because I've got these new washers, I'm going to use them. And these washers, it's going to be hard to see, but they are actually waved, so they'll retain tension on the nuts when it's assembled. Being careful to try and avoid adding any bits of grit or anything that's picked up from the bench. Cleanliness is the watchword with vacuum pumps. Same with the actual cleaning process. I don't show it because it is hours of work, but at some point I will sit down and make a video that just goes through the various processes that can be used for cleaning the pumps. It's something that is different on every single pump rebuild, because you want to carry out the work that the pump needs. So rather than having a process of do this, do that, you have to look at every component and consider what processes are going to bring it back. You want it to be as clean as possible with as little surface modification as possible. So we don't want to be abrasively cleaning parts, for example sealing surfaces and leaving scratches on them. So if the pump is clean to begin with, then solvent washing is probably enough. If you do have a lot of build up or, heaven forbid, rust on the pump, then more is required. We can retension those. It is going to adjust how tight the pump sits together. What I want to do at this point though is be able to turn it by hand so I can feel the tension that I've got in the pump. And at this point you're not going to be able to do that by just grabbing the shaft and turning it. You're going to need to actually put the coupling on the back end, at least temporarily. So the key goes in, key fits down in there. Everything on this pump is tight, which is good news. It means it's remaining to tolerances everywhere. I need to be a little bit more thoughtful with that. Just use a drift to make sure that's in all the way. And then I can drop the coupling on. I haven't put the felt pad in here. This is just a temporary install. I'm not going to tighten it on there or anything. I just want to be able to turn the pump. So rotating it only in the direction that it would turn when running. Yeah, it's got a sticky point there. I had a feeling that sticking vein may well be what's causing that. It will turn, but it is a little bit sticky there. Yeah, I'm not entirely happy with that. What I'm going to do in the first instant is to just back off the nuts. It's possible I've already over tightened it, so back those right off so that they're finger tight. So they're obviously slackened off beyond what they're going to be. Just try that again. Is that enough to free it up? No, it's still catching. Better to deal with it now than to go ahead and rebuild everything else and then find that the pump actually isn't running freely. The black that I'm getting on my hands is, there's some very loose paint on the back end of this, which I'm not proposing to deal with. That's what's colouring up my hands. So I'm going to take a step back, remove the end plate, and that was where I think it was sticking. And I can easily check that by so my first stage, no problem at all. I'm happy with that. Pay more attention here. Why my veins aren't moving nicely through there. Take that spring out. Clean that off. Refit just the rotor without the veins. I'm going to check again. Yeah. So it is my veins causing the issue there. Now, of course, the rest of the pump has decided it wants to come apart. I'm not going to just force it back together again. Let's just take the coupling out from underneath. Reseat that. It's a bit of a process, isn't it? Right, now this one is locking up as well. Oh. There we go. So I may do a bit of editing on this, but it's probably useful to see the whole process, isn't it? I mean, these things happen. So why not show you warts and all, you know what I mean? So now we're back to the point where I can check these veins, see what the problem is here. See, this could be as simple as just having got something picked up off the bench and just got caught up. Once you've got oil on these parts, you know, they are going to attract any kind of dirt and fluff that's sitting around, and one little piece could be enough to cause that problem. It could be that when you started the pump up, whatever it was, free, but you don't want that to be inside the pump anyway. It could also be that these very fine springs didn't seat. Actually, I think that vein, so that one's good. This one seems to be quite tight. Yeah, that is not moving as it should. Okay. So what we need there, what's happened is this vein has swollen. It's slight, and it would probably wear itself back in. But that's not the way I want to go about things. So I'm just going to take a piece of wet and dry. This is about, well, this is actually 320 grit. And I am just going to apply a bit of oil to that, hold it flat down onto the paper, and just give it a few strokes on either side and on the ends or sides. There's either some contamination on there, or as I say, it's actually swollen. So you just take it back down, hopefully down to tolerance. Fresh oil back in, and that's now sliding nicely. And hopefully that will overcome that problem that we were having of the thing sticking. Springs back in. Just make sure they're actually going into the holes. There we go. That's in there. Now that whole assembly is moving and feeling better. Hopefully that's not going to stick anymore. So again, just get that engaged. Refit it into the dowels. There we go. We've got to get this end plate back on. It's gone down into place nicely that time. And then I'm going to recheck it. Apply the nuts to the studs. I don't want to pick this up and have it come apart again, like we saw just then. But this time I'm just going to go finger tight initially, just so that it doesn't fall to pieces on me again. Slide the coupling on. It's still locking up. Okay, I think I've found our culprit. Do you know what it's turning out to be? It's the coupling itself. So I've stripped it right the way back down, so I've just got the first rotor section in there. No vanes, no nothing to interfere. That's turning beautifully. I push the coupling all the way in, then it locks up. Pull the coupling back, and it's free again. So it would appear that my haste to just slap the coupling on there and turn it was actually the cause of my problem. And if I had assembled it properly and given it the right space behind there, maybe we wouldn't have run into that issue. But these are the things that we have to deal with. And I'd rather show you that I'm an idiot than have you rebuild a pump and find that it won't rotate. So there we go. Let's rebuild this then, see whether that solves our issue. I did still have that rather tight vane in the second stage, so in creating one problem we maybe solved another. What I'm going to do I now think what's happening is this grub screw, which is most of the way out, is actually what's catching in the back there, so I'm going to remove that for now. And sure enough, we now have a pump that's turning properly. Okay, so yeah, it looks like what happened was the grub screw that I hadn't tightened in there was just catching up in the back end here, and that's what was actually stopping the rotation. So the moral of the story is just to take your time, do things properly. What we can now do is tension up these bolts a little bit. And then once the rest of the components are assembled, go back again by hand and just set the tension on there. We want it to be tight enough that we make good vacuum, but not so tight that things start to bind. So there we go, we're back on track. While it's in that orientation, we can add the components that go up on the end here. So we have a clamp, we have this spring assembly that sits up here, and we also have the end of the oil passage. It goes under the clamp. There's a bolt the holes to clamp in place, and then obviously we've got that impeller to do as well. So first thing to do is to fit the replacement rubber components. So I've got my little bullet shaped piece here that sits through here. It's not easy to install, not easy at all. It's a very tight fit once it's in, so just try and make sure that it's straight in position and then guide it through. Check round and make sure that that's solid all the way through. Okay, and then that will bolt up here, but we need to get the piece that it seats onto. So this assembly that came out, you can see that there's an orifice here, which is what that seats against. And then on the other end, there is a kind of dump valve that's able to move, and it has a very fine orifice through the middle of it that lets the oil pass through. So that should be free moving in there, that little piston. And then there's an O-ring that sits in this groove to seal that when it's put into position. So small O-rings like this can be tricky to get on, especially when you're having to hold the piece as well. But if you get it round there so it starts in the groove and then encourage it over, and then just a little bit of lubrication on there so that it goes in easily, not forgetting to put the piston back in place, and then that goes down into here. It should push home. It would be ideal to put that in roughly the right location, so you've got too much turning to do. But then once this is together, that's got to line up so that it's flat. So this actually has a bit of a square head, so you can put a spanner on there to just adjust it to get the rotation. This is quite free moving now with all that oil that I put on there, so we shouldn't have a problem there. And we can bolt this back up into place. Put those in fairly loosely, and then we've got adjustment to get all of this to come together. So that should end up sitting so that the seal will close onto it when it's all done up, and it obviously needs to come round so that it's free from the impeller that's going to sit here. So we'll give those a slight nip up just to hold it in place, and then recheck it once everything's together. So our clamp sits down here over there so that the oil pressure isn't able to push that out. And again, we're going to need to adjust that, so it doesn't need to be tight at this stage. And then finally our impeller goes on. The longer of these, there's a small pin down here, there's a longer one here, and they do actually have replacements for both of those that came in the kit. So I'm not going to use them in this instant because everything's been cleaned up and I don't have any problem with what's there. But it is a very comprehensive kit. So the through hole goes onto the longer shaft, obviously. So that moves nicely. And then the very, very tiny circlip that needs to go on behind that. Oh, small parts are pain. There we go. Let's just make sure that's actually in the right place, which it is. So that's now secured on there. And then the block on that spring plate there is actually going to end up sitting down against that. We just bring it so that it's in close proximity, and then I can take a small adjustable, I should have a needle nose adjustable spanner here. There we go. And I can just get onto the flats on the side of there and adjust the position. Pretty much like that, so that the spring seat comes down squarely onto the hole. It's not quite there. It's all eyeball with these old pumps. And of course it goes out of position as soon as you tighten the screw. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Complicated one, this, isn't it? Back in the day, prior to any of the pumps that I would cover on this channel, we had pumps manufactured without dowels. So every component had to be hand set in position. There were a range of techniques we used for that. One of them was putting cigarette papers between the rotors and stators to get the position, moving the stator around until the cigarette paper was just caught, and that was effectively your feeler gauge. Cigarette paper as a feeler gauge, and of course once the pump was assembled and you put some oil in it, the cigarette paper would just disappear, dissolve into the oil and be gone. Okay, so slow process today, but we are getting there. So the next thing we'll do is to install some new valves. All the way along there. Which are going to sit like that. They get their plate over the top. So I'm just getting right down to make sure that the studs in the plate are lining up and catching the springs correctly. and tighten those. This one's being a bit obstinate. There might be some debris in there. There certainly was. It feels really gritty. Don't like it. Okay, got our pump cartridge built. Coupling back on. And that's turning freely. And I'm finally happy with it. Alright. Unused parts out of the way. And that then would go into the oil box, but because of the way that the Alcatel pump is built with these through studs that couple everything together, it's kind of a final moment when you put that together. And I make sure everything else is there first. So if I flip it over onto its side again here, we've now got the gas ballast to refit. So as I said, this is the plunger that came out with its spring, and there's a couple of washers behind there, and then it had the seal on the end of it there that sits down in the bottom. So most of that is going to get replaced now. We've got one washer coming off, then the spring, and then that might be a step in the machining. No, it's not. It is a washer. I had a feeling it was going to be. So the plunger, the piston is going to get reused, but all of those other components are getting replaced. So I've got a new washer, a new spring, and another new washer, and then on the tip of that, the new rubber seal. Sits down on there, and then I will lightly lubricate that. And then that whole assembly drops down in there. And then that the amount of movement is very, very small, but you can see there that is moving up and down against the spring. The control knob sits on top of that so that the plunger is in the channel. And then I can rotate that to the fullest extent just so that it sits down easier. It's a little bit easier for getting the screw into the centre of it. And then I can just tighten that off. And we should have control now over the position of our gas ballast plunger. And we're ready to assemble that then back on. Just get rid of some of the excess assembly oil. And return to our oil box, which has been cleaned out, scraped away all of the cork gasket that was there, which in this incident was extremely stuck. So that'll sit over the studs, and then I can lower the pump into it. There we go. Now, of course, we can't tighten anything off on that at this stage until we've got the whole motor and everything else on there, which is an older way of doing things, shall we say. So we now need to rebuild everything that will sit in between. So a new felt pad is going to go into that channel. I want to make sure that's dry before it goes in, otherwise the felt pad will be saturated before the pumps even run. That sits in here. Then we can finally fit the coupling. Rotate it so we can get the grub screw into it. And then obviously that wants to sit. The general rule is that the flat surface of the coupling sits flush with the end of the shaft, and that should give you the correct clearance behind it. If it sits too far down, then it's going to run on the metal surface on the back and make a lot of noise. If it sits too far forward, then it's going to interfere with the other face of the coupling. You just want to get that so that it's flush. And then the grub screw will hold it in place. Of course it moved the moment I did that. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, happy enough at that point. Then we have this metal sheet which fits over between the two. I'll make sure that I put that the right way up. There is actually a dowel pin there, and there's a second one that goes up here which is currently missing. Still got a little bit of the old gasket on there. Just need to remove that so that it'll sit flat with the new one. There we go. Get that out of the way. So I'll replace the dowel that was missing over there, and then put this on the right way up so that it sits with the dowel in place. There go. So that's sitting all the way down. Then there is a paper ducting sheet that goes over that. Again, orient it round to fit the dowels. Get that into position, and then we do a new spider coupling to go in there. And then what I like to do is just rotate it until the open point is roughly to the top of the pump. Just means that I know which way around the motor coupling end needs to go. Move a few of the other redundant parts out of the way. And bring up the motor. Very heavy motors. Now, I did take the motor off. I had to put a 3-pin plug on it so it would fit to a UK socket. So that's done. I've tested it and it runs. It's a touch noisy, but for the time being it's good enough. I want to get all the dust out of it. Just try and avoid putting anything back. And then that's got to line up obviously with the coupling now. This being such a heavy motor with very little to get hold of, fingers crossed. I'd say that's gone on. Yeah, looks okay. Then we can put some new washers. Quite like these waved washers. It does make them slightly easier to pick up off the bench. New washers, old nuts. And we get those tightened down. Try to get equal tension as you go down, because this is actually pulling together the motor, those two, the one paper gasket and the aluminium plate in between, and then the adapter, and then the cork gasket, and then the oil box, all being held by these same 4 nuts. So we want to get those to go down evenly so that nothing gets pinched. We need to get reasonably tight with these, because they are critical to the operation of the pump, to keeping it leak free. So that should do us. Then the base plate can go back on, which again has been cleaned up, had all the old oil removed from it. Need a 6mm Allen key. Do those two up. it's starting to look like a pump again. So I've got oil filler, oil drain, plugs. One of them's disappeared. There it is. They're both the same actually in the case of this pump. They've both got O-ring seals on them, which need to be replaced. These O-rings have hardened off to the point where you can't actually see what's O-ring and what's plastic, because they're virtually identical. Making them very tricky to remove. There we go. Don't necessarily advise that you use Stanley knife blades to remove O-rings, because if you slip they'll go right through the bone, but that's what I needed in this instant. Give that a clean dry. Fit a new O-ring, which is lovely and soft. And then I'll install that one as my drain plug. Same again with the other one. That is just breaking apart. But again, a little bit of real world for you. Sometimes I do think obviously it makes sense making these videos to try and use a clean pump because it's easier for you to see what's going on, but it's maybe not as realistic as it could be. And when you come to look inside your pump, you're going to find some of these issues that we've seen with this one. You know, things that don't go back together quite right, things that don't come apart very easily. So why not include it? Okay. Just the inlet and outlet ports to go now, and we'll have a pump that's ready for testing. So that's my inlet port. That's been through the tank and properly cleaned. I've got several O-rings here, so I'll figure out which one fits where. That nice big seal. Looks good for the inlet. Does sit rather proud though, so maybe it isn't the correct one. That one's definitely too small. I think it's that one. What I'm looking for there is it needs to obviously sit proud of the surface it's sealing. We do have this centre tube here which orientates into the middle there. The larger O-ring wasn't going to allow that to fit in, so that feels good. Similar deal with the exhaust side. This is still very filthy. This exhaust is actually quite poor condition. Could do with replacing, but it's going to have to go on for now, otherwise I can't clamp the inlet side on. So that sits on there. Should locate into there. What we also have here is a new exhaust flap. Now there are two in the kit. I really can't see anything different between them dimensionally. The one that came off was black, so I'm going to fit the black one and assume that that's correct. The exhaust can go sit over there. And the clamp goes into position. I have to remove one of those to get the clamp into position. Clamp that back down. And the O-rings there are doing the sealing, so the clamp is to stop things moving and just apply a little bit of pressure onto it. Nothing more than that. And then I did miss out. Does that fit? No, that has to fit underneath. So the inlet strainer sits underneath there, pushes down. Alright, and that is our Alcatel 2008A finally put back together. A little bit trickier than some of the more common pumps, a little bit more work involved. I will take this over to the bench, fill it with oil, put it on test, and I'll add a little clip, just let you know how that got on. And there's an Alcatel 2008A oil sealed rotary vane vacuum pump on test, pulling 1 × 10⁻³ millibar. Sounds nice and quiet. It's another one back from the dead. If you need your pump serviced or you need any assistance with vacuum related technologies, feel free to give me a call.